I'd like all the boys and girls to come and sit right up on these front rows so I can let you smell something. And it's not me. Okay. Today is Epiphany Sunday, which ends the 12 days of Christmas. It started on December the 25th and goes to January 6th. It just so happened that January the 6th falls on a Sunday. Sometimes it doesn't. But let me ask you a question. We read, the story that Peggy read today was about the wise men that we call Magi. And they brought some gifts. What were the gifts that they brought? Frankincense, myrrh, and gold. Now we know what gold is, right? It's a precious metal. So that would have been an offering that would have given the family some resources to live. But what is frankincense and myrrh? Do you know? Any idea? Yeah. They're spices. Now I have some here. I have some frankincense. So I want you to take your hand and put it like that, and I'll put a little dot of it on each of your hand, and you can smell what frankincense actually smells like. See if you like it or not. Okay? A little bit of frankincense on you. 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 You want some on your hand? You have some sure? Okay. On you. On you. You don't want any on you? On you. Okay. And on you. Now, smell it. What do you think? Do you like it? You don't like it? Maybe Mary could say, well, you can just keep the frankincense. I'll take the gold. Monty Python, by the way, like Brian. This is another spice, but it's in the Bible. I had some myrrh, but I don't know where the myrrh is. But this is one that's really nasty. This is called spikenard. Put your other hand out. You don't want to mess with it. You're not so sure about the spikenard. Yeah, it's kind of greasy and green. So. If you throw up, you have to do it somewhere else. Try this spikenard? No? Nobody has to. You do. Okay. Okay. No? No. What do you think of that? Well, maybe people back then, they liked things that didn't smell so good, right? But these wise men, they show up, and they were guided by a star. That's what our story tells us. And they went right to where the baby was, and what did they do besides give gifts? They gave gold, frankincense, and myrrh, but what did they do? Remember what it said? They knelt down, and they worshiped him. They honored the Christ child. So, that's what we're about today, is having the light of God come and we worship the Lord. You can go back to your seats now. Thank you. You can let your parents smell that nasty stuff. Thank you for helping me today. Have you ever experienced real darkness? I mean, I'm talking about physical darkness where there's no light whatsoever. You know, Stephanie hates to come into a dark house. And when we come in our garage, when we open the garage and go in there, and we first go in, you have to feel your way upstairs to turn the lights on. But, now my son came for Christmas, and he fixed us up. You know what we say? Alexa, turn the lights on. Except the fixture down in the hallway that we really needed it isn't the right one, so we got to wait on that one. But at any rate, we can say, and I just love it. It's she's so obedient. I just say, Alexa, turn on the light in the den, and she says, okay, cheerily. It's really nice. But Stephanie doesn't like to come into a dark house, so sometimes we leave some of the lights on. Once I went to Cave Springs. It's a cavern in Georgia. We descended into the dark corridors of the subterranean cave. There was a string of electric lights that illumined the passageways all the way down as we went deeper and deeper into the heart of a mountain. We entered these wonderful chambers of stalactites and stalagmites. And then they warned us they were going to do this. They cut the lights and cut off the flashlight, and we were in absolute zero light. Your eyes could not get used to it and see the little bit. Even if somebody had just had the tiniest little flicker, it would have lit the whole room. It was a dark cave with absolute zero light, and for just a few moments, and it was chilling. You could almost feel the eerie darkness closing in, and people would get scared, so they didn't do it but for about 60 seconds and turned on the light. If anybody had panicked or something, they would have turned it on. That was good. Because your eyes just couldn't adjust. I'm sure that our pupils were as big as our irises. But when Stephanie and I went to New Zealand, we lived in Asia, we got to go down to the New Zealand area, and we went to a cave that advertised sea glowworms. Sea glowworms. I'd never seen a real glowworm. I didn't even know they existed. But we saw for the first time real glowworms. We went into a cave. Again, the string of lights was on, and you could see the stalactites, the stalagmites, the sides, the different puddles of water and all of that. And then they said, we're going to turn out the lights, and you're going to see glowworms. And when they turned on the light, it was amazing because it was black dark in there, except on the ceiling there's tiny little worms. They're little larvae about this long, and they hang on little threads like spider webs. And on one end is a little light bulb. It sort of glows like a lightning bug. You've seen lightning bugs, right? But it was like a constellation. You'd look like stars in the sky because there were thousands of them up there. And they just live there, and that's the way they attract insects, is that they have a little light glowing in the dark, and the bug comes up there and gets caught in their little spider web, and they eat the things. Wonderful story. Glowworms grouped together, hanging in the ceiling. But when you had that contrast of light and dark, now, I had a horrible experience of the fear of darkness one time. I was in the 8th grade, and the 8th graders were the little kids in a school with seniors, 12th grade, 5 years difference. And to entertain ourselves after lunch, we would run out into the courtyard, and somehow we were not very supervised at this school. They just trusted us, and they shouldn't have. And we took rubber bands and formed armies and would shoot each other with rubber bands, some projectiles. Well, somebody, I think, put a gem clip in theirs instead of just a piece of paper and hit me right in the right eye. It ruptured my iris. I began to see blood in my eye, and I went to the doctor, and it ended up putting me in the hospital. Went to the nurse, there at the school, and ended up from one thing to another. Of course, I didn't shoot rubber bands at anybody anymore, but the guy that he shot first got me. And I had to spend about 5 days in the hospital with both eyes patched up to keep the eyes from moving, with the real possibility that I would lose sight. That scared the bejeebers out of me. For 5 days I had to lay still, both eyes patched up, to minimize internal bleeding in the eye, and the blood would be absorbed, and it ended up, I can actually see out of that eye better than the other one now, so I'm so thankful. But I remember that when I was there, that was physical darkness, but somebody really brought some spiritual light. There was an evangelist that was from another city, I think up in Tennessee, and he'd come down, a Reverend Ed Corley, and he was preaching at my church. I was an 8th grader. He didn't know me. I didn't know him. He was the guest evangelist for a week, holding Bible studies and prayer meetings at our church. And he came to share God's good news to our congregation in a series of services. But he showed up at the hospital. He came to the hospital. I was just one of the youth in the church, and that gracious man came to the hospital to visit me. He had purchased for me, and I have it down in my office. I meant to bring it up, but I forgot, a book that I have treasured all those years. It was a little book for young people about my age at that time called Play Ball, and it was testimonies of Christian athletes at the time. I've never forgotten that act of kindness and light, that a man who didn't even know me, was just a guest at our church, came all the way downtown Atlanta to the hospital where I was and saw me and had prayers. It was light and it was life. I couldn't see him, but he shared the visit, gave me the book, and offered a prayer. My mom, of course, could read that book to me. That meant a lot. And she also, I remember in those days that I was there, she stayed by my side all the time, and she read a book that many of you may have read. It's called Hind's Feet on High Place. on high places, hinds feet on high places. And it was an entertaining parable that went on and on and on for a whole book. God allowed me to heal, but Ed Corley brought light and hope and love. It was an epiphany moment. I just found him on Facebook this week. I guess he's up in about his 90s, but he's still living and still teaching the Bible. I'm hoping to reconnect with Brother Ed Corley after all these years and tell him what he meant to me when I was just an 8th grader. The Bible talks about light often, and the text that Linda read was this: "Arise, shine, your light has come." These words appear in Isaiah 60. They offer a message of hope, of life and light to people whose light had almost gone out. That ancient preacher, we don't even know who he was. He came much later than Isaiah of Jeremiah, but his words were edited into the text. He intended to fill the hearts with hope, the hearts of his people Israel. They were downcast, they were despairing. Life had been hard, and their fortunes, he said, are just about to change. People live by the light of hope. The opposite of hope is despair. Despair is when you give up, that nothing's going to get better. People give up all the time. I appreciate our 2 brothers that came today to share of their trying to save lives because people despair and they self-medicate in drug addiction. And in doing so, they often lose their way. Hope. We live by hope. That's the light that we need. Psychiatrist Viktor Frankl was a Jewish man, a psychiatrist, but he was caught in Hitler's net and spent years in Nazi death camps. And while a prisoner, even in those horrendous circumstances, he continued his research in the human condition under circumstances that were so extreme and demoralizing. He took notes as personal memoirs of his observation of life in that depressing setting, in a death camp. He labored through 4 different death camps, including the famous one, Auschwitz. His parents, his brother, even his pregnant wife all died in the ordeal. But based on his observations and his own experiences living through this, he was researching for his later practice. Frankl argued that we cannot avoid suffering, but we can choose how to cope with it and find meaning in it and move forward with renewed purpose. He wrote the book that I read in seminary called Man's Search for Meaning, and it emphasized hope as a fundamental necessary component for human well-being. It came out, that book that was Man's Search for Meaning, you'll find it on a lot of bookshelves in Barnes & Noble and so forth. It came to be one of the 10 most influential books in America. Frankl concluded that people just need hope. He noticed that if people had rituals and they could talk about things, regardless of what the circumstances, that one day I'm going to be out of here and I'll go back to a bar in Paris and be with my friends again. One day I'll find my friend who got separated from me, or my wife or my child, and we'll get back together, regardless of if it didn't even make sense. He said if they would just take something like a hubcap and go through the motions that they were washing their face even when there was no clean water. Anything that was giving hope, people believe in almost anything. People will cling to hope in any way. And he developed a kind of theory called logotherapy. Logotherapy. He took the Greek word that's in our Bible, the one that we translate word or meaning or message, and he developed a theory that people have to find hope. He used the word logos as meaning therapy. This theory holds that our primary drive in life is not really pleasure, as Sigmund Freud, another psychiatrist, had said, but it's actually a drive to experience hope. Frankl upheld that we should be in the pursuit and discovery of what we find personally meaningful. Does life have meaning? So many people have given up. They have futurelessness. It doesn't make any sense. We're just here, and so we have an epidemic of young people committing suicide because life has been drained of meaning. But this writer that we hear in Isaiah cried out that the light has dawned. Arise, shine, your light has come. It's come like the morning sun. Light drives out darkness. Light reveals what's really there. Light exposes. Light enlightens. Light clarifies. Light makes clear. Light gives meaning. This is how the Bible uses the term light. Light helps us see. We often sing right before we read the Scriptures, which is a form of light. We sing, Thy word is a lamp unto my feet, and a lamp unto my feet, and a light unto my path. Several hundred years after Isaiah wrote, Arise and shine, your light has come, John wrote in his gospel these words, In the beginning was the Logos, the word, the meaning. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word was with God in the beginning. Everything came into being through that Word. And without that Word, nothing came into being. What came into being through that Word was life. And life was the light of all people. And that light shines in darkness, and the darkness doesn't extinguish the light. Light, logos, meaning, light equals hope. Your logos has come. Your light has come. That's the message of Christmas and Epiphany. Your life has come. Light. And the Christian message is filled with light because this light shines the truth in a world of darkness. Darkness is lack of insight. Darkness is ignorance. Darkness is even hate. Darkness is evil and danger in that way of looking at it. Darkness keeps us from seeing what's there. It conceals, it hides. Darkness envelops us in meaninglessness. But John later wrote in those little letters that he later wrote after the gospel, God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. Isaiah could have announced it. Arise, shine, your God has come. And it would have meant the same thing. But listen to the whole words. Though darkness covers the earth and gloom the nations, the Lord will shine upon you. God's glory will appear over you. In Christ, the light of the world has come. On Christmas Eve, we had 2 services in which we lit from the Christ candle, and all of us lit our candles one by one by one. And this light, even though we had dimmed the lights in the building, was filled with lights and glowing faces. The one has come who knows everything we're going through, whether we have lost a spouse, whether we have lost a husband, a wife, a child, a sibling. Light. The Magi followed a light. They followed a star. They were suspicious characters to the Jews. We just think about them. We've turned them into something they weren't. We've turned them into, we use the term wise men. We've turned them into kings, but the Bible said nothing like that. The Bible never indicated they were kings. It refers to them as magi, astrologers, people who dealt with magic. So they were suspicious characters among the Jews. And so when they showed up in this caravan and they come to Jerusalem, it says Herod was upset, and so was all Jerusalem with him. Nowhere does it indicate in the Bible that there were only 3. That's been a tradition. We have 3. We even put 3 up there, and we crown them with kings. Nothing said they were kings. Nothing said there were 3. There may have been 2. There may have been 5. There may have been 15. It just says that wise men, magi, came from the east. We get the 3 from, there were 3 gifts, but, 3 gifts doesn't mean I've given more than 3 gifts, just one person, me. Perhaps there were 5 or half a dozen. We don't know, but the text said they came seeking a newborn king, following some kind of phenomenon of light that was in the sky, like a star. Not an ordinary star, but one that appears and disappears, and one that moves and shines light down. But the problem was when they got there, and they said, we've come seeking the new king of the Jews. What happened? I didn't think they were so smart, so wise, to go to the king that was the incumbent king and said, we've come for the new king. The incumbent was still there. Herod wasn't a kind man. And so we know that he hatched that plot to find out and try to destroy all the male babies. Can you imagine the horror? Christmas was not only the child in the manger, but it was also the horror of Bethlehem and Ramah and the surrounding regions where children were massacred. God speaks through the hazy, dim light of nature, and it is a light, but very imprecisely. But God also spoke more clearly through Scriptures. And so when they got there, Herod said, well, where is the newborn king supposed to be? And Herod was part Jew, and he called in all of his Bible scholars, the scribes, to inquire. And they found an ancient text that was written 8 centuries before Christ by the prophet Micah that said this. They said it's prophesied there will be a ruler from Bethlehem, a few miles away in Judea. And he quoted the text, you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, by no means are you least among the rulers of Judah, because from you will come one who governs, who will shepherd my people Israel. Well, we as Christians accept that as Jesus, the Good Shepherd. The Magi were off again to seek out the child. God's light appeared again, and with the light of nature and the light of God's Scripture, they found the child. And when they arrived, what did they do? In their hearts they bowed and they gave. Acts of homage, acts of generosity. What is it that we do week after week? We come to worship and we give. I could just put up an offering bag in the back of the church and say, go there and drop in whatever you want to give. But the fact is, it's an act of worship that we actually give. The wise men came and they worshiped and they gave. That's the appropriate response to Jesus, worship and giving. And in that one text, and I'm going to end, there were 2 humanities. There are those in this world, and the Bible is realistic about it, whose heart is filled with hate. They cannot get over a past. They hate, and they hate themselves, and they hate one another. But there are others whose hearts are filled with worship. Hate is darkness. Hate is destruction. Hate is alienation from God. Hate leads to despair. But love is light. Love is healing. Love is restoration and reconciliation. Love is hope. And as John tells us, he said, God is love. He also said, God is light. Whoever hates his brother is in darkness. Whoever loves is in God. So arise and shine, people of God, because your light has come. Can you say amen? Amen. All right. Let's